Howland.
Thank you, Lascan Corla. The Labour Party strongly and warmly welcomes this resolution, and I want to thank the Government for responding to last week's request from the Labour leader Alan Kelly for this motion, so that the House could act together and the voice of the elected representatives of the Irish people could be very clearly heard. The last 6 days, Lascan Corla, have been among the most momentous and frightening in Europe since the end of the Second World War. The settlement that we Europeans thought existed, a settlement that underpinned peace on our continent, has been fundamentally undermined and attacked. So this Dáil needs to be clear and united in our response. Lascan Corla, we've previously heard in statements some few comments beginning with "Putin is evil, but what about?" In my view, there is no space now for whataboutery. The single and clear issue before the House is the invasion of a member state of the United Nations, a sovereign and independent state, by a neighbour with the objective of removing its democratic administration and making it a vassal state. I said when we were talking about these issues last week that President Putin's aims are stated clearly. He hasn't hidden what he intends to do. He wants the restoration of a super Russian state, reabsorbing into its territory the now independent former Soviet republics. The views, the wishes, the hopes, the expectations of the citizens of those states are of no interest to Vladimir Putin. Today, and we're watching the news as it unfolds on an hourly basis, may be a critical day in the conduct of this war of aggression. As we've all watched, hundreds of tanks are within kilometres of the centre of Kyiv. Rockets have landed in the centre of Ukraine's second city, Kharkiv. It is alleged, and I believe it to be a fact, that cluster bombs, banned in many countries, have been deployed against civilian targets. The humanitarian consequences of these actions are horrific and wholly unacceptable. We've stated repeatedly, we stand with the people of Ukraine. But today, in his video link and presentation to the European Parliament, the Ukraine President Zelensky gave a real challenge to all of us when he said, "Prove that you are with us." So what can we do? What more can we do? So I want to make a number of suggestions. Firstly, and I'm sorry the Minister for Justice has left, because I wanted her to hear my direct appeal to her, as I did earlier to the Taoiseach, for the immediate enactment, and I mean this week, of the Proceeds of Crime Gross Human Rights Abuses Bill, the so-called Magnitsky Act, that is on the order paper of this Dáil, past second stage. It aims to expand our existing proceeds of crime legislation, the one that created the Criminal Assets Bureau to take and seize ill-gotten gains and put the onus of responsibility on those who are holding those gains to explain where they got them and to prove that they're legitimate. We wanted, in the bill that I have proposed, to define certain conduct occurring outside of this state, in places like Ukraine and in places like Israel, to describe it as criminal conduct if that conduct constitutes or is connected with a gross abuse of human rights. Under the bill, conduct is stated to constitute a gross human rights abuse It is carried out by, at the instigation of, or with the consent or acquiescence of public officials. We need to ensure that the pals of Putin, who have stashed money all over the world, and most probably and most likely in this jurisdiction, can have that removed from them. That is the most damaging thing we can do for them. The bill, as I say, I think has all party support, and I think it would be a very strong, a single issue that we could do is to provide the time this week in this House to pass the remaining stages of it and make it law. We can also accept refugees from the Ukraine, and I welcome again the comments made by the Minister for Justice and the fact that the temporary protection measure that she has outlined is in place. But the numbers she talked about so far are tiny. The United Nations said today that 660,000 people have left Ukraine for fear of their lives and well-being. I know that the visa requirement to get here has been removed, but we obviously must be more proactive than that. We're on the periphery. Our European neighbours are taking in massive numbers of people now and desperately struggling to provide them accommodation, provide them with shelter, food and the basics of living. We need to plan in a war footing almost for the reception of refugees, to welcome families of Ukrainian national residents in Ireland, but many, many more who need shelter from the ongoing conflict. As I say, we need to have clear, unambiguous plans, funded, set out. Thirdly, yesterday President Vladimir Zelensky signed an application for EU membership. It was his and his people's declaration that they look towards Europe for their future. A massive political statement. We must respond in kind. We must agree to declare Ukraine an EU candidate country, and that, I understand, was the majority decision of the European Parliament in the last 24 hours. Fourthly, an investigation of potential war crimes has been opened by the International Criminal Court. Let all aggressors take note. There must be a complete and exhaustive examination of their actions in Ukraine. We must tell them clearly now that anybody involved in the war crimes being perpetrated against the innocent people of Ukraine will be held to account. If it takes years to do it, we will follow it up. The world community is clear and united in that regard. And hopefully that will have some impact in reducing the enthusiasm of some of the Putinistas for their vicious campaign of oppression that is ongoing right now. Cahirak, yesterday I had the task and indeed the great honour to move a resolution of solidarity with Ukraine at the plenary session of the British-Irish Parliamentary Assembly in London. It, needless to say, was carried unanimously by representatives of democratic parliaments in all these islands, representing England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland, but also the Channel Islands and the Isle of Man. We sent our support to the people of Ukraine and to our fellow parliamentarians in the Ukrainian Parliament, the Verkhovna Rada. Democracy is often spoken about in all our assemblies, but it is under specific and brutal assault right now, today, on our continent. It is unclear how this invasion will end, although we already know that nothing will be the same after this attack. All of us in this House and all our people that we represent fear for the Ukrainian people in these dark hours. We admire their courage and their strength, their resolution and their bravery. We watch in amazement and admiration their courage and also the courage of those Russian men and women who have taken to the streets in cities across Russia, demanding peace and the withdrawal of Russian forces from the Ukraine. Russia will take its own course, but we People who are committed to the rule of law and democracy cannot tolerate a return to a Europe that we thought we'd put behind us in previous decades and centuries, where aggression, conflict and subjugation existed. Our determined and clear resolve as a Parliament must be to stand with Europe, stand with Ukraine, and give a clear message to the valiant people of that benighted country in their hour of great need.